Employees have been entering and working in confined spaces for many years. Failure to closely follow specific rules, regulations, and confined space safety standards can just about guarantee serious injury or even death. There isn't any room in confined space entry for risk-taking. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration's Standard 1910.146D defines a confined space as any area which is large enough and so configured that an employee can bodily enter and perform work and has limited or restricted means for entry or exit, is not designed for continuous human occupancy. Let's take a moment to review the most common confined space atmospheric hazards. Oxygen deficiency. In order to safely enter a confined space, OSHA requires that the space have a minimum of 19.5% oxygen. And at 8%, well, you're probably history. Not only is oxygen deficiency a concern, but in certain cases, an excess of oxygen can occur, creating a fire hazard. Flammable or explosive gases. Many confined spaces may contain flammable and/or explosive gases or vapors. Some flammable and/or combustible vapors are lighter than air and collect at the top of the space. Others, which may be heavier than air, settle at the bottom. Toxic gases and vapors. Toxic atmospheres are generally divided into two major classes: irritants and asphyxiants. Irritants are gases that in low concentration may only cause an irritation to your respiratory system, such as a sore throat or coughing. High concentrations can cause serious concerns or even death. Hydrogen sulfide, H2S, a common gas found in confined spaces, is an extremely toxic substance. Hydrogen sulfide is an insidious gas which smells like rotten eggs. Asphyxiants can cause death by displacing or pushing out air you need to breathe. The most common asphyxiants are carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. The term non-permit required confined space is defined in 1910.146B as a confined space that does not contain, or with respect to atmospheric hazards, have the potential to cause any hazard capable of causing death or serious physical harm. The key is that these examples have sufficient natural or mechanical ventilation to prevent the accumulation of hazardous atmospheres. Permit-required spaces, on the other hand, defines a confined space that has or has the potential for one or more of the following hazards. Atmospheric hazard, such as oxygen deficiency, toxic or combustible environments. Engulfment hazard. An engulfment hazard is the potential for an employee to be trapped by liquids and/or flowable solids such as powder or grain. Configuration hazard. A configuration hazard is represented by the shape of a space, such as a hopper, with inwardly sloping sides, and any other recognized hazard. Safe entry and work in confined spaces require employees to be trained in the risks, hazards, and procedures for working safely. No work should take place in a confined space, permit or non-permit, without careful pre-planning beforehand. Testing and evaluation of the atmosphere should be completed by a trained, competent employee. Ventilation equipment must be working properly and of sufficient capacity to adequately ventilate the space. The confined space entry supervisor or observer is the person directly in charge of the operation. They'll see to it that the atmosphere in the space is safe to enter, that ventilation is sufficient for the space, and that all necessary safety and emergency equipment is available for use. The observer's sole job is to supervise the safety activities of the task, monitor the atmosphere, and assure that only trained employees are assigned to the job. In addition, they must remain in direct communication with the workers at all times. An additional trained emergency standby must also be nearby to assist in the event of a potential rescue. Let's now talk about proper techniques involved with confined space entry. First, acquire permission. Complete the necessary permits or forms and arrange for all the necessary equipment to be on site. The next step is to sample the atmosphere by testing the opening. You can do this by first testing around the edges or in a pick hole. Then, open the lid slightly and test in the upper aspect of the space. Drop about 1/4 of the way down, halfway, 3/4 of the way, and on to the bottom. carefully testing and documenting the results as you go. Make sure you provide adequate ventilation to make the space safe or augment existing ventilation. If needed, clean or purge the space of any unsafe products or materials. Confined space emergencies are no place for single-handed heroics. More than 50% of confined space deaths involve potential rescuers. If your organization uses employees to make a confined space rescue, each employee must be provided with and trained in rescue procedures, personal protective equipment, and equipment required to make a rescue. Work team and emergency crew members must be trained and hold a current first aid and CPR certificate. And no matter what, no rescue may ever be attempted without the use of the proper respiratory protection, such as an SCBA, escape pack, ventilation, and mechanical hoist with full body harness. If you think about it, with over 300 deaths annually, the rules and regulations as adopted by OSHA make good sense. Testing for safe environment makes sense. The use of emergency egress equipment also makes sense. Training, personal protective equipment, permits, written procedures, and other related requirements all lead to a safer workplace for you. Thank you.